Hey, this is Scott with GuitarAndBass.com. Thanks for checking out this video. Today we're going to talk about Roundwound versus Flatwound strings for the bass. So let's get right into it. First, let's talk about how a string's made. The string is made of two parts. It's got a core, a solid core, and then it has some type of metal wrapped around it. It could be nickel, it could be stainless steel, and those are two parts. Now, the wrapping can either be a flat wrapping or a round wrapping. So if you think of a pencil, that's the core. If you took some ribbon and wrapped it around that, it'd be smooth. If you took a pipe cleaner and wrapped it around a pencil, you would have those little ridges in it. So the design of the string, the structure of the string, and how that structure, when it's magnetized, moves over the pickup coil, just the difference in that physical structure creates a different tone. So let's talk about the difference in tone. Let's start with Roundwound. Roundwound is known for having nice mids and some high frequency response. It also has low. The lows are kind of can be kind of plucky, have some punch to them, as opposed to the Flatwounds. They are going to have just a really solid fundamental low tone, not really any high or mid in there that compared to the Roundwounds. And this is really interesting when you think about how you could use this in a musical setting. So with a Flatwound, when you get just really the fundamental tone, no overtones that produce the mid and high frequencies, you just get this really nice bass sound. All of the classic bass songs from the 50s and 60s would have used flatwound strings because roundwound wasn't developed until like the 70s. So that classic bass sound, just big, right where you want it, all the bass you want, that's the flatwound sound. So if you want that vintage sound, definitely go with flatwound. Now, a couple things in terms of playability. Let's talk about the flatwounds. The flatwounds will feel kind of slippery to us, right? If we're used to playing roundwound, which most of us are, we feel like we're kind of sliding past the fret because they're going to be smoother. They also are under more tension. So flatwound strings are under more tension, which means you have to press a little bit harder. You have to use a little bit more muscle energy. Right? And that can be a little different. So those two things right there, if you're used to playing roundwound, you got to get used to. Now, let's say you're going the opposite direction. I know some old timers who, they grew up in the 60s playing flatwound strings, and they don't really like getting on. Some of them, I shouldn't say all of them, they don't like getting on the roundwounds because they're like, that hurts my fingers, right? Of course, they're already used to playing with the high tension strings, so that doesn't bother them. So coming from the other direction, I've noticed, I've seen that happen as well. So now another really interesting thing about the flatwounds is because they don't have these little grooves in them like the round do, you don't get the fret noise. Very clean movement. So that's really a cool thing. If let's say you're recording and the bass part's really exposed, and you don't want any of that fret sound to kind of slip in, those roundwounds are really good for that. And also for live music that is subtle and the bass lines are really exposed, where fret noise wouldn't really fit with the music. Flatwounds. Rock music, loud stuff, sometimes the fret noise is part of it, right? So in that sense, not a big deal. So those are some things about the differences. I guess the last thing I would say, and that is the price. Now there is a big difference in price. Can you guess which ones are more expensive? Yeah, you guessed right, the flatwounds, right? The ones that maybe aren't as in high demand. Also, it takes, it's a little bit more difficult to produce that flat wound string. So they're going to be about twice as much. The flat wounds are about twice as much as round wound strings. So that's a bit. That's a lot of money, especially if you're not sure you want to stay with round wound or flat wounds. You know, you got to say, I'm going to take off I got one bass. I'm going to take these strings off and put. You know, that could be. And then you find out you don't like flat wounds, and then you got to go back and maybe buy a new set of round wounds. And that could be about $60 that you're putting out. So I guess my recommendation would be, if you want to get into trying the flat wound sound, but you only have one bass, it might be a good idea to see if you can, you know, find a friend who, or you know, someone who might let you come over and play it, sort of get a feel for it first. I mean, ideally, having a second bass is what you want. You might not be in a position for that, but having a second bass with flat wounds on it. And then it's kind of like, you know, you're like a carpenter with a toolbox. You've got a bass that has round wounds, and you're going to get certain sounds out of that. And then sometimes the music calls for the flat wound sound, so you got both things too. I guess the last interesting thing I'll mention is, and it makes sense, but it might be something that you haven't considered or thought about, but when you run the flat wound and round wounds through your effects pedals, they're going to react differently too, because again, the round wound, there's more overtones, so there's more higher frequencies bouncing around, and of course the effects are going to do stuff with that, right? So what comes out of that is going to be a sound that's processed from the fundamental to the overtones. It gives you one sound. Now you put your flat wound bass through your effects with less overtones, less mid frequencies and high frequencies. Well, you're going to have a slightly different sound out of your effect, and that's kind of cool. So in a sense, by investing in a second bass with flat wounds, you end up creating, even with your effects pedals, in a subtle way, a whole different type of sound that you can use in your recording and playing. So it's pretty exciting. I'd encourage you to, kind of think about, maybe if you don't have a second bass with flat wounds, to, keep that as part of a plan, and maybe work towards getting that, and just start adding that into your sound palette, if you will. All right, well, that's all for this video. Thanks for checking it out. Look forward to seeing you next time. And once again, I'm Scott with GuitarAndBass.com.